All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us to talk about long-term care planning for near retirees. My name is Kristen Maki, and I am the Community Relations and Outreach Program Manager for WACARES Fund. I am pleased to have a fantastic panel joining me today to give an overview of what you need to know about this topic. So we'll get started with some brief introductions and why we're here. And then each panelist will cover some brief remarks on an area of the topic, and that will include an overview of the WACARES Fund, which is Washington State's new universal long-term care insurance program, and how it will help address some of the issues that we're talking about. Then we'll open up for discussion and audience Q&A. For those of you who have joined on a computer, you can go ahead and submit questions for our panel through the Q&A function. Feel free to start getting your questions in now, and we'll get to them when we reach the discussion section of the agenda. Now I will call on each panel member to share their name, their role, and their organization. Laura, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Kristen. I'm Laura Cepoi, the Executive Director for the Olympic Area Agency on Aging.
Thank you, Laura. Cathy.
Hi, I'm Cathy MacCaul. I'm the Advocacy Director for AARP here in Washington State. AARP in Washington State has about 900,000 members. Nationwide, we have about 34 million members. So welcome to this webinar, and thank you to DSHS and the WACARES team for organizing it.
Thanks, Cathy. And Ben.
My name is Ben Veghte. I'm Director of the WACARES Fund here at DSHS.
Great. Thank you, Ben. All right, I am going to go ahead and start with a quick audience poll. We're just asking you a few quick questions to help us understand who's in the audience today. We're asking how close you are to retirement, how much you've done to prepare for future long-term care needs, and what you're most interested in learning about today. So I'll give folks who joined on their computers a moment to answer those questions while I give a quick overview of some of the reasons that we're here today. So when we talk about long-term care, what we're talking about is help with activities of daily living. And that can include care in a facility like a nursing home, but it also includes home care and other services and supports that help people do those activities. Long-term care is predictable. 70% of us will need it at some point in our lives. And it is expensive. The annual cost of home care is $33,000 for about 20 hours a week of home care for a year. And long-term care is not medical care, which means it's not covered by health insurance and not covered by Medicare, except in rare situations. It's also not covered by Medicaid until all of your savings are exhausted and you financially qualify, which many families with a care need end up having to do. And overall, it is not affordable for most Washington seniors. The median household income for Washington seniors is $56,000 per year, and half have no 401k or pension income. All right, thank you to those of you who have filled out our poll. Let's take a quick look at the results. So we are sharing those right now, and hopefully you can see that we've got a really great contingent of folks who are 0 to 4 years away. We've got just about half of the folks who responded to the poll said that they're under 5 years away from retirement. And then we've got a contingent of folks as well who are more than 15 years away. So we will talk about some things that are relevant for everybody, and then we'll just have a special focus today on near retirees. We also asked how much you've done to prepare for future long-term care needs. And it looks like we've got a pretty even split. 30% of folks said that they have a plan and they're on track to meet their goals. 40% about said that they've done some planning, but are not sure if they can accomplish the goals that they've set maybe. And then we also have about 18% who haven't done much planning, but know long-term care really well. And then a smaller group that is just hasn't done much planning yet and is not very familiar with long-term care. And it looks like we've got a lot of folks who are interested in learning about types of long-term care services available, financial planning and options for paying for long-term care, and as well as a smaller group of people who are interested in community resources, legal paperwork to prepare, and some folks who are also interested in hearing about updates that you can make to your home to be able to stay there a little bit longer. So thank you. That's really helpful for us to know so that we can cover what you're looking to hear from us today. So we are going to go ahead and get started with those panelist remarks. We'll get started with Laura, who will talk about the big picture of long-term care planning. So Laura, I will go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, planning for long-term care has a lot in common with emergency preparedness. It happens all at the local level. When a disaster strikes, your best bet is to tune into your local radio station. Find out where the shelters are or which streets or bridges have been taken out by the storm. Your first responders are likely to be neighbors or people you know. For those who need long-term care at home, getting from your local area agency on aging will let you know what resources and options you have in your local area. There are 13 area agencies on aging, AAAs, in the state, which cover all the geographic areas to provide services and resources. You can be linked to what you need point in time. AAAs play a critical role in meeting nutritional, health, and wellness needs of older adults and people with disabilities. So tune into your local AAA station to get what you need and check out websites so you know what is offered in advance. Because understanding your community resources is important as it will shape your choices. Do you live in an urban or rural environment? And depending on your answer, transportation and access to services may be harder for you. Is Uber, Lyft, taxi, light rail service, ferry, is it available? If so, managing up on therapy appointments when you can't drive will be easier for you. It also may be more difficult to find a caregiver for a rate that you can afford in an urban area. Downsizing may also be more expensive in an urban environment if you're lucky enough to make an offer in the real estate market. Identifying natural supports. Who do you feel safe with? Who will show up for you? Identifying your natural supports is important so you know what your safety net is. Maybe having access to adult children nearby is something to consider, or maybe belonging to a very active faith community that you can rely on for help is what you're looking forward to. Understanding the answers to this now will inform any decision you have when you need assistance or when you have to make that determination of whether it is in your best interest to move or not. Finding paid caregivers is tough all over the state. There are limited numbers of paid caregivers. So coming up with a plan for those times when you need someone to stop at the store for you or provide a lift is useful to keep in mind. Not everything depends on paying for it. And the best part of retirement is the reported increase in social connections and overall contentment. So that part is, I think, with social isolation is something that we're all really concerned about, and making sure that we have these communities in place, identifying them is really super important for long-term care. Home design. Our communities, our home is part of a community, and we know that most people, 90% of people, want to remain in their own homes, and to do so they have to have good design so that they don't have to be dependent on others or pay for additional services. So what is good design and aging in place? You know, the usual answers: single story, well lit. I would add energy efficient, because once you are on a capitated income, handling larger winter heating bills can be a challenge. And it seems to also be something we get a lot of requests at our AAA to assist from our senior emergency funds, or to give referrals out to the low income energy assistance programs. Safety is something really important to look at home design. And we know that 80% of falls that happen in the home happen in the bathroom. And it's due to slippery surfaces. So when we look at floor mats, toilets that are too low lighting at night, when people use the restrooms, when these emergencies happen. We also know that in my region in particular, something like over 40% of emergency response calls are in response to falls. Our state in particular has a higher mortality rate from falls than any other state, something that we still don't quite understand. So these all have solutions that are probably easy to come up with if you're tending to mobility and looking at balance and utilizing programs that are available and free to everyone. Advanced health directives and legal paperwork. Another thing that we want to make sure that people have in their back pocket. Making healthcare decisions for yourself or someone who is no longer to do so can be overwhelming. That is why it's so preferences and arrangements while you can to make those decisions and participate in legal and financial planning together. Before senior illness or healthcare crisis, identify a family member or close friend, a community organization that can assist with the creation of healthcare directives or other financial management documents you have. Keep the plans in one place and review these plans regularly. For employees, for those of you who are still working who have employee assistance programs, you can get these documents completed for free by just using these benefits. They're easy online tools and should be accessed by everyone who can, as it reduces anxiety for loved ones who may have to act on your behalf. So whether it is for you or your partner, a family member, someone else you care for, you may need additional support for either a long time or brief period to get through a recovery from an illness. Understand the continuum of care is important for you. So you may find that an assisted living environment might be something you're interested in if something were to ever happen, or the option of using an adult family care home for a dependent, or accessing a skilled nursing facility, which provides licensed personal care. Understanding the continuum of care choices are important so that you understand the different costs, you understand your choices, and you can inform next steps when that might come up for you. I'm thinking about folks with mild or moderate dementia who don't require that much attention for personal care may thrive in adult family care homes where there's supervision and attention, whereas someone with more complex rehab needs may be better off in a skilled nursing facility. But all this also is dependent on your financial planning, and it's critical. And so our next speaker, Cathy MacCaul, will be speaking more about this crucial aspect for long-term care planning. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. All right, Cathy, you are up.
Great, thank you, Laura. It's been so great to have incredible partners like the Area Agency on Aging working in this work. And Laura is right. I mean, long-term care planning is a complex issue, and it is different for each and every person. There is no cookie cutter approach. There's no one approach to solve everybody's long-term care needs. There's a few things that we know, though, about Washington's long-term care system is that one of the things that we have in this state is incredible supports and resources to support family caregivers. Because we know that all of us at some point or another will probably have to help care for a loved one. Oftentimes I talk to people and they say, well, I'm not really a caregiver. I just help, my mother with medical appointments, or I help buy groceries. That is a caregiver. You are taking out your time of the day in order to help somebody else with their needs. And generally it's a person that's an older adult or somebody with disabilities. We have about 828,000 Washingtonians that are providing that type of care to their aging spouses, parents, and other loved ones. And that's an equivalent to about $10.7 billion in unpaid care. So here in the state, again, we have an incredible system of home and community-based services because we don't want family caregivers. And that's also why Walk Cares is so great, because it also helps family caregivers. We know on average that family caregivers spend about 20% of their own income to help care for a loved one. And that 50% of unpaid family caregivers have negative consequence in their work. They oftentimes are having to leave work, or they have a job loss, or they lose a promotion because they are not fully attentive to their career and their work life. We know that, in fact, that 1 out of 6 people leave the workforce entirely in order to care for a loved one because they have to make that choice and their loved one has not prepared for long-term care. And the demands of unpaid caregivers is daunting. It takes a huge emotional, physical toll, and there's a lot of chronic diseases related to that level of care. We also know that caregiving creates a cyclical problem of poverty. Next slide. So when we talk about walk cares and the 36.5 does make a difference. And I know this group is around near retirees. And so under the new law, and Ben Veghte will talk more about how this works for near retirees in terms of the vesting schedule. But what this does is it actually gives people assurance that they will have something when it comes time for their own long-term care needs. And it could be something as, potentially a level of care, maybe 20, maybe 24, 25 hours per week of in-home care or care by a family member that comes into your home. And you can actually compensate that person so that they're not having to use their own money to help provide that care, or to compensate for the loss of a job and income from that job. 6 to 12 months in a residential care, as Laura mentioned, there's adult family homes. They are much more affordable. Assisted living also is much more affordable, but that is very limited in terms of either providing medication management or some limited transportation. Oftentimes they also provide all meals. Nursing home is, again, a higher level for acute care, higher medical needs. Also, that would potentially include memory care for somebody with increased cognitive decline. But all of this can be funded and supported through your Walk Cares benefit. And as Laura mentioned, design of a home is really important. And so your 36.5 could also be used for constructing. A portion of it could be used, or again, a vesting period of a partial benefit could be used to put in grab bars into your bathroom, or it could be used to put a ramp onto your house, or again, to pay that family caregiver to provide the support. Next slide. So the cost of care is really challenging for everyone. Again, this is personal. It's up to you to look at your own finances, look at your family and what resources you have available, your savings, retirement funds, what are the assets that you currently have. Often people spend those down in order to qualify for Medicaid, but it's important, and I have a link on the next slide for you to go on to the ALTSA page, and you can learn more about what is called a look back period. And a look back period is oftentimes people start to move assets out of their retirement accounts so that they qualify for Medicaid. But right now here in the state of Washington, there's a look back period of 5 years. So that's something you want to take into consideration. Again, all this information is publicly available on the DSHS website. There's also on the Healthcare Authority website. You can also talk to a financial planner. You can talk to your, at work, you might have supports through your employer for legal assistance and guidance. And oftentimes those benefits will also help you navigate and understand some of these options as well. But long-term care is expensive. And I just have some median data from 2021, and this is national data, that, a median nursing home, so that's the highest level of care, potentially, it's not acute care, it's a high level of nursing home care, runs about $9,000 a month. And that's a median. $4,500 for a 1-bedroom unit in assisted living. And for a home health aide, it's about $5,148 a month. So when we look at the 36.5, that, goes really quickly. It can be spent really quickly. And we know that families and individuals, just a little bit of breathing room, because when you hit the wall, when a family member, a loved one needs care, and you're struggling and trying to figure out what to do, it's good to know that you have a little bit of a buffer to help you slow down all this whirlwind of decisions that have to be made, and that you have some comfort that you're going to have a little bit of a financial resource to fall back on. Next slide. So when it comes to helping you with tools, AARP, I talk at various events, and I often say that long-term care is priority number 1, number 2, and number 3, and that's not far from the truth. So there is a wealth of resources on aarp.org, and I provided a couple links here. One is aarp.org/caregiving. So I tried to make these as simple without the real long address with all the numbers and, hyphenations and everything else. Is a great resource. There's plenty of links on there. There's also calculators for you to look at your own, forecasts and plan for creating for long-term care. It also goes through the options around care and what's available in terms of care. And then there's also the aarp.org Prepare to Care. And this is really information and tools for family members that if you're thinking about you're going to be caring for an individual, maybe you're near retirement, but maybe you have a parent that's in their 80s or 90s. And what are you doing and what are they doing in order to prepare for their care? So that's also some incredible resources and information. And then finally, I don't want to forget is DSHS. It's a little bit longer of address, and I think Ben will probably share this again, but it's dshs.wa.gov/ALTSA, which stands for the Aging Long-Term Supports Administration. It's ALTSA. And then also, again, we're really fortunate to have a great website called Community Living Connections here in Washington State. So those are just a few of the resources. And you can also go to aarp.org/WA to also available on the Washington State website for AARP. Thank you. And now to Ben.
Thanks, Cathy. And for folks who are interested in getting these links and seeing a copy of the slides, we will have that available on the Walk Cares Fund website after the webinar. Ben, let's go to you.
Thank you so much, Kristen, and thank you, Laura and Cathy. We're so lucky to have such a strong AAA network in our state, the area agencies on aging, and we're also lucky that that AARP has been such a strong thought leader in this area, providing resources to support family caregivers for decades. And it's precisely because of those strong institutions that we have in our state, and as well as our strong existing aging services through the Department of Social and Health Services, that we were able to launch Walk Cares on top of all of that existing infrastructure. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how the program works for near retirees. I know that last year there was a lot of marketing by private insurers to individuals to think about opting out of Walk Cares by buying private insurance, because there was a deadline for if you wanted to purchase private insurance to opt out. The legislature recognized that there were some gaps in the original Walk Cares statute, and so it enacted some reforms this past spring in 2022 that really addressed most of those concerns. The most important one for today being that near retirees are now eligible for benefits. So if you're close to retirement, if you're born before 1968, you now earn benefits through Walk Cares, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. There's some other things that the legislature is looking at. For example, they asked our oversight body, the LTSS Trust Commission, to develop policy options for the legislature to consider that would allow people to, even if they did buy private insurance and opt out last year, it would allow those people to come back into Walk Cares if they wanted to. So that's something that people may want to keep in mind in the coming years. Just keep an eye on what happens during our legislative session next year to see if that becomes a reality. I wanted to talk a little bit about the differences between private insurance in the long-term care space and Walk Cares, just to make sure that people have good information. There are key differences in terms of what it covers, when coverage starts, when you qualify, et cetera. Walk Cares is designed to cover virtually all forms of long-term care, including the family providers, and even your own spouse could be a provider under Walk Cares. So that means that if you would rather have a family provider than a professional care worker caring for you, under Walk Cares you can hire a loved one as your paid caregiver, and that way the money from your benefit goes to a son or daughter who lives outside your home but stays in the family. That can help people get through these difficult times. many private long-term care insurance policies don't pay family providers at all, much less the spouse. So that's a unique benefit, not completely unique because they don't. So if you're comparing those, always be sure to look at that. Another difference is that to qualify for, once you have the coverage for walk cares, it's easier, it's a lower threshold to qualify for benefits. So when you think you need long-term care, it's much easier to qualify for walk cares than it is for private insurance, because private insurance has to be tax qualified, has to use what's known as the HIPAA trigger, which is a higher for how bad off you are in terms of your need for long-term before you would be eligible for benefits. And for walk cares, we have a lower threshold of how bad off you need to be before you would be eligible for walk cares. And so the point here is that it's not an apples to apples comparison and comparing the two products for that reason as well. So those are two reasons. A third reason is that even once you are approved for care under walk cares, you can get the care immediately. Under most private long-term care insurance policies, even after you qualify for care and meet that higher threshold, even then there's typically a 90-day and often it's a 90 service day waiting period. It's termed an elimination period before you're eligible for benefits. So probably the majority, you have to pay 90 days out of pocket before the policy kicks in, whereas for walk cares it kicks in right away. So those 90 days can make a big difference. About 1/3 of people only need long-term care for a year or less. So if you have to wait 3 months before you can use the benefit, some people die before they ever are able to use the benefit in private long-term care insurance, or have to pay a big chunk of their total lifetime costs out of pocket because maybe they only need it for 9 months, and a third of that they had to pay out of pocket. So it's just important to keep in mind that there's key differences between private insurance and walk cares. Another is that the way the premiums work is different in that for walk cares, it works such that you only pay you pay a percentage of your earnings. It's not a risk-based premium, it's a percentage of what you earn. So it's about 0.5%, 0.58% of what you earn. And you only owe that premium while you're working, while you're earning money. So if you're 45, let's say you're 55 today, with walk cares, let's say if you're going to retire at 65, you would pay in for 10 years. The typical worker makes about $52,000 a year in our state. In that case, you'd pay a little over $300 a year, about $24, $25 a month into walk cares. You would pay that for 10 years. So your total lifetime cost is only 10 years of those premiums, about $300 a year. For private long-term care insurance, you have to pay until you need care. And for most people, they need care at the very end of their lives. So if, let's say you live to 85, if you're 55 today, you wouldn't pay 10 years as what you would for walk cares. You'd have to pay 30 years of premiums, times whatever the annual premium is. And on average, it's $2,700 a year nationally. Maybe you can get something for $2,000 a year if you get something that's less expensive. But $2,000 times 30 is $60,000 in lifetime premiums. Whereas a 55-year-old for walk cares who earns the typical wage would only pay about $3,000 for 10 years of premium. So that would be, say, for a 55-year-old, $60,000 versus $3,000 in terms of lifetime premiums. It's a big difference. Even if you make 4 times as much as the typical worker, let's say you make $200,000, you're still only talking about $1,200 a year. So for 10 years, about $12,000 in lifetime premiums, whereas that same person for private insurance would typically have to pay more like $60,000. So it's important to keep in mind, as a fourth difference, the lifetime cost of the premiums versus the annual cost. The annual cost really isn't the relevant comparison, it's the lifetime cost. Now, for most private insurance, you do get more generous coverage. Most private insurance companies aren't in the business of offering a coverage that's under $100,000 because the business model is only profitable if they're selling a bigger product, and because there's the same administrative expenses for a private company, regardless of how high the benefit is. So if it's so they tend to sell mostly larger products. For all those reasons, long-term care insurance isn't affordable for most middle-class people. Only about 7% of people nationwide can afford private long-term care insurance. And so that's why WACARES was enacted, to create an affordable alternative that the whole broad middle class can afford. But what we also acknowledge that most people want more than just $36,500 in coverage, or at least many people want more than that. For some people, they may think that's enough. But for people who want more, we've been working with the private insurance industry to develop supplemental policies, WACARES supplemental plans, where insurers could offer plans that take the WACARES benefit as the deductible and cover you everything from $36,500 upwards. And that is something that we've been working on with the private insurance industry. We developed a consensus report with recommendations on that. They were developed and brought forth to the commission, our oversight body. Our oversight body, the LTSS Trust Commission, is going to be considering adopting that report. And if so, then the legislature will take it up next legislative session as to whether or not they want to pave the way for such policies. So keep an eye on that. You can, through our website, wacaresfund.wa.gov, you can stay updated on all of those processes. Next slide. So how does the fund work? It works much like Medicare hospital insurance. It's a universal program, or Social Security for that matter. Everyone pays in from their first job to their last job, about 0.5% of their wages. It's an earned benefit, so only those who contribute are eligible, just like Social Security or Medicare. Self-funded from contributions by workers. There's no employer match. You only pay in while you're working. It's not a risk-based premium like private long-term care insurance is. So, in private insurance, if you're a female, you pay up to 50% more in premiums because women live longer than men. And so because it's a risk-based premium, they have to take that into account in the premium rate. We don't have to take that into account because everyone's in the same risk pool, kind of like with Medicare, and you don't pay a different rate based on your gender. Similarly, people with health histories that are indicative of maybe needing long-term care, like people who are overweight, have diabetes, or if your parents had dementia, if you have any of that in your health history, you are going to pay a higher premium if you get covered at all. 30% of people who apply for private long-term care insurance are denied coverage because of their health status or health history. And if you have some of those risk factors, even if you do qualify, your premium can be very high. So one advantage of WACARES is that everyone is in the same risk pool. And just like with Medicare, everyone pays the same premium, and it's a percentage of your earnings, not based on your weight or your gender or your health history or your parents' health history. It's a way to cover everyone. And WACARES also, because it's self-funded, of the age weight. So if there weren't WACARES, then as Washington, long-term care cost doubling as well, and that would have caused taxes to go up. Because we have WACARES, where all of us are funding our own long-term care needs in advance by paying into this fund, that will keep the state from being overwhelmed by this and taxes from having to go up significantly, sales taxes and other taxes in the coming years. Next slide. So employees pay in about 0.5% of their wages, as I mentioned. Premiums go into a dedicated trust fund that can only be used for this purpose. U.S. government employees are excluded. If you're an employee of a tribe, you're only covered if the tribe is opted in, and self-employed individuals can choose to opt in if they so choose. Certain workers can apply for an exemption. Workers who live out of state and commute to work in Washington are eligible for an exemption. Temporary workers with a non-immigrant visa, like farm workers or some tech workers, if your visa means that it tells you that you have to leave the country after a couple of years, you're eligible for an exemption. Spouses of active duty military, because they move around the country, are eligible for an exemption, as are veterans with a 70% or greater service-connected disability. And workers who had private long-term care insurance before November of last year are also eligible for an exemption. Next slide. This slide gives you a sense of the lifetime premium cost for walk cares for 3 different income amounts. So that reflects what I mentioned before. And this is really the key thing to compare to private insurance. What is the lifetime cost, not the annual cost? Next slide. And so, to comparing walk cares to private long-term care insurance, I mean, I covered the key points, so I won't go through this again. I want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A. So let's go to the next. So there's 3 pathways to qualify for walk cares. The main pathway is the middle one, where you pay in 10 years over your life, and then you have permanent access to benefits. There's a second pathway for people who have an illness or an accident in the middle of their lives, or maybe they're already have a disability, and if they're working and paying in to walk cares, if you're working and paying into walk cares and you need care and you've paid in 3 out of the last 6 years, you're always eligible anytime in your career, even if you haven't paid in for 10 years. And then what was new this past legislative session, is that a pathway was created for near retirees, so that for every year that you pay into walk cares prior to retiring, you can earn 10% of the $36,500 lifetime benefit. So if you pay in 1 year and then retire, you would have access to $3,650 worth of long-term care benefits. If you pay in 3 years, you'd have a little over $10,000 in lifetime benefits. But everybody gets something. Next slide. The benefit is flexible. You can use it on paying professional home care aid, hiring a family member as a paid caregiver, meal delivery, grab bars in the bathroom, etc. Next slide. So with that, back to you, Kristen.
Thank you, Ben. And we are going to get started with some audience Q&A. So the first question that we've got is from someone who is retiring pretty soon here, who asked, what about those of us that are nearing retirement and moving out of the state? And what happens for us paying into something that we may not be using? Ben, do you want to
Sure,
take
that's a great question. And that was, the legislature is keenly aware of this issue, and they asked our oversight body, the LTSS Trust Commission, to develop policy options for the legislature to consider next year to make benefits portable. And we're doing that. The commission is doing that, and it is developing recommendations for which it will send to the legislature on this. So this, is something that the legislature may take up next legislative session. I know there's a lot of interest in this issue in the legislature, so I would say stay tuned on that. I think there's a good chance this issue will be addressed this legislative session, but I can't get ahead of that process.
All right, great. Next question. We've got a couple of folks here who said that they opted out last year, enrolled in private long-term care insurance, but don't want to stay opted out and are wondering if they can get.
Yeah,
back
this is
into the
another issue
program.
that the legislature asked the commission to look at, and we're developing policy options on that as well. And this will be teed up for the legislature to consider if they so choose in this next legislative session. I know that they want to look at the issue of allowing people who have opted out already to drop that exemption and join walk cares probably by a certain date. There would be probably a drop dead date by which you'd have to make that decision, but that's something that they're looking at. Again, I can't get ahead of the legislative process, but it is something that's on their radar.
Okay, great. Another question about walk cares. With inflation as it is currently, is the walk care premium changing, or is that set at the current percentage?
Thank you. That is at the current percentage. There is a process by which the benefit, the $36,500 benefit, is adjusted for inflation over time. There's an annual meeting of a body that called the LTSS Trust Council that will adjust the benefit up to inflation every year. And so that's how inflation is accounted for, and through that body adjusting it. And so that there's a built-in mechanism for that to happen, and that's already priced into all of our cost estimates for the program. So the premium shouldn't change based on inflation.
Great. And let's see, we've got someone asking, are there ways to be able to protect savings when spending down to be able to be eligible for Medicaid? I don't know, Ben, if you want to answer that, or maybe Laura or Cathy.
Yeah, maybe Laura or Cathy.
I'll take that one. You would really have to consult with a financial planner. The first thing I would really suggest is that you go on to the DSHS website and look at the income, because you can still keep your primary residence. There's a limit on the value of that home. I think it's 636,000, but don't quote me. That you can still keep your primary residence, especially if you're living in it or you have a spouse living in it. So there's all sorts of different levers and things. So I would definitely consult a financial planner or just start your journey by going to the DSHS site, and they spell it out pretty quickly. You can also go into Google and search term Washington look back period Medicaid, and they will also spell that out for you. It's pretty complicated if you try to go to the Healthcare Authority site, but the two best resources I saw were on DSHS and then also Google. There was a couple nonprofit, seniorlife.org or something like that, had several some summaries of the look back period and the asset test.
Great, thank you, Cathy. Another Walk Cares question for you, Ben. I've got somebody asking, with the delay of the program, many people are expecting that there might be another opportunity to purchase private long-term care coverage and opt out. Will there be a new opt-out opportunity?
There is no such opportunity under current law. When the program was delayed, it was to create give time to the agencies to prepare to implement the new exemptions that were for the out-of-state people who commute from out of state and the other groups that I mentioned. There is no currently foreseen additional opt-out opportunity. I don't expect that to happen. But again, I can't get ahead of the legislative process.
Thanks, Ben. We've also got someone asking, once you retire, how do you access Walk Cares for the care you need? Can you talk maybe just a little bit about what that's going to look like?
Sure. So once you retire, I mean, hopefully, you retire for a while before you need care, but whenever you do need care, you would simply go on to our website and you open up an account and apply for benefits, and we would check to make sure that you paid in, and if you meet those contribution requirements, then we would accept your full application, and then if we would send someone out to your home, most likely to do an assessment to see that you actually do need long-term care. Again, our threshold for qualifying is fairly low, but we do have to prevent fraud, so we do do an assessment, and if you need care, then you could then hire whoever you wanted, anyone whom we contract with. So a very, very broad network of long-term care providers in our state, and they would provide your care. It could also be a family member, and then they would bill the state, and they would get paid by the state for providing that care.
All right, and we've got a couple of folks who are very near retirement, who are maybe retiring within the next 6 months, the next year, who are asking about the program and whether there is an opportunity to participate for them.
And there's not works like Medicare, Social Security, Medicare hospital insurance, or Social Security, where it's based on paying in over your career. Once you're retired, there's no opportunity to pay in. So unfortunately, people who are going to be retired before contributions begin wouldn't be able to participate.
All right.
Cathy, did you want to round that out?
I just saw another question in the chat too that was kind of related, a little bit related, is that that people might retire from their full-time job, but you could still pay into Walk Cares if you're working part-time. And I think that's really an important distinction, because obviously, a lot of people retire, but to retire to what? And I find a lot of people that I know that are in their 70s retire and then 6 months, they're just like, I need something more to do. And, they often find a part-time gig. And that you can still contribute to WA Cares if you're working part-time. So, that full-time job that you might have had, is just not the only way that you will qualify for WA Cares. But let's say you go to work, at a little community organization or a restaurant, or you start a side business, start your own little entrepreneurial business. That's all considered, part-time work, and still make sure that you can pay into WA Cares. Ben, did you want to add more to that?
No, I think you explained it well.
All right. For our next question, we have got somebody asking if there's a possibility that WA Cares could be an option to use outside of Washington State.
Could you repeat that?
Asking if there's a possibility that WA Cares benefits could be an option to be used outside of the state.
I mean, there is a work group currently working on that issue, on the design options for the legislature to consider for how benefits could be paid in other states. And so that's something that we're currently working on. And the legislature will probably take this up in one way or another next year. We can't predict how they will take it up, or whether something will be enacted in this regard or not. But I know it's an issue that they're keenly looking at, and we are as well.
And the one other thing I'd love to be able to add in to this as well is that we know that it's going to really make it much easier for us to have what you're describing as portability. So if you go to another state, is if other states enact similar types of long-term care programs in their state. And AARP as a national organization, we know of probably a half a dozen states that are looking very closely at Washington State and looking at what we're doing and wanting to replicate what we're doing here. So if we have parity potentially with other states, I think it's going to be far easier for us to administer and monitor and create a program that will be able to go into other states. But as Ben said, there's tremendous work. He's leading much of the commission effort and the work groups that are looking at this effort around portability. And ultimately, it's going to be the responsibility of our legislature to make those decisions.
All right. We've got a couple of people who are asking about younger folks who are maybe just entering the workforce, or who are in their 20s, who are going to be contributing to WA Cares over the long term, and asking what that kind of contribution ends up looking like. Will they end up paying more than the $36,500 in premiums over their work life, or what that looks like after, kind of talking about what it might look like for someone closer to retirement. Ben, do you want to take that one?
I mean, it's still, if you could pull up that slide again, Kristen,
Sure.
from earlier in the deck, you'll still see it's still a great deal for almost everyone. I mean, unless you earn a ton of money, you're still better off. 30, are you paying for 30 years, which is the typical working career if you take out time for studying and childbearing and child raising and on things that people do. For the typical worker, that's $8,700 over a lifetime. Even if you make 4 times that, if you make $200,000 on average, which most people don't make on average over a 30-year career, right? Somebody might be really fortunate and make a lot of money in their 50s, but most people don't make that amount in their 20s, right? So this is the average over your whole career. Even if you make 4 times that, you're still getting more out than you would pay in. And keep in mind the 36.5 goes up with inflation. So in 30 or 40 years, it's going to be more like 50 or 60,000, not 36.5. So just as wages go up, the benefit's going to go up. And the reason why this is a good deal is because we don't have the expenses that private insurers have. We don't have, I don't make $1 million a year. No one on my team makes a lot of money. We don't have conventions in Hawaii or other places. We don't expense things the way private companies do. We don't have underwriting expenses. We don't have, for underwriting is where in private insurance, because it's a risk-based premium, you have to do a health assessment of people before you give them insurance. And the whole point of that assessment is to not cover people who are going to need care. If you think they're going to need care, you shouldn't cover them, right? And that's just the business model. But so you to sort that out, people have to take blood tests and provide medical histories, and then claims workers have to, or underwriters have to go through that material. We don't have any of those expenses. We don't have underwriting expenses. We don't have claims adjusters, closely looking at trying to be careful about not paying too many claims, because we want to pay claims. This is an earned benefit that we want Washingtonians to have access to. So we don't have a lot of the expenses that private insurance does have, and people. So overall, it just makes this a better deal, because also there's no profit at all in this, right? So there's no shareholders, there's no there aren't those expenses as well. So if you take out underwriting and profits and high salaries and a lot of other expenses that companies have, and we don't have those expenses, you can see why we're able to a better deal for people, much like Medicare hospital insurance does. People pay in a little bit over their career, and then when they're older, they don't have to pay for their hospital care. They have access to hospital care because they paid for it while they were working, a small amount out of every paycheck. This is the same model.
Great. We've also got somebody asking, what's the benefit of contributing to a program like Walk Here's earlier? Why not start contributing later in life?
I mean, you could certainly do it. Did you want to speak to that, Cathy, or I could speak to it? I wasn't sure if you were raising your hand there.
Oh, no, sorry.
Okay. Yes. I mean, you could structure this in a number of ways. But if you don't have people start till later in life, then the premium would have to be much higher as a percentage of people's wages. And so, so this is typically the way social insurance programs, which is what this is the general category for these kinds of programs like Medicare, Social Security. You pay into Social Security from your first job at age 15, delivering pizzas or whatever, until your last job. You don't start paying in at 50 to Social Security, because if you did, it's like a 401k. If you don't start paying until late, then it's hard to build up assets, right? And so by having people paying over the whole career, we're able to keep the premium much lower.
All right, great. And we've got somebody asking for clarification on that near retiree pathway. I said, if you retire in the next few years, if you only receive that 10%, is that 10% of the benefit amount or of the amount you're contributing?
Of the benefit amount. So for each year you pay in, so it's a great deal for near retirees, right? If you pay in, for the typical worker pays in $300, they get $3,650 in long-term care benefits. So, and that's true for each additional year you pay in as well. So it's a fantastic deal for near retirees, and those amounts go up after if you're retired at 65, you stop paying in, but that benefit keeps going up with inflation, so to keep pace with costs. So that's how that works.
Great. And we've got somebody asking, in contrast to something like Social Security, where maybe more people or most people are planning to access it, what about people who don't end up needing long-term care?
Sure. Well, 7 in 10 of us will need long-term care. I'll let you guys do, Laura or Cathy, you do either one if you want to speak to that.
Well, certainly, we know that 70% will need it, but maybe your partner, maybe your adult child. This isn't just, you don't get long-term care just because you've aged or you've retired. It can happen at any point that somebody in your household may need it. So you may need this benefit as a caregiver, as that somebody in your household may need this benefit.
Yeah, that's a great point. We live in families, right? We don't live on our own. We all live in families, and they're not all living in our house, thank goodness, right? But we do live in families, and we're part of networks, and it's not just if I need long-term care, I'm not going to be one providing it to myself, right? It's going to be people who love me and care for me, who are going to help me out. And if I have access to a benefit like this, I can help pay for that, and either by them paying them or by getting someone else to help me, so there's less of a burden on them. And so it takes a village to meet this need that families face. The other thing I would say is that for all these types of programs, like unemployment insurance or workers' compensation, L&I, or Medicare, part of the benefit is that when you need it, it's there for you. The other part of the benefit is the peace of mind you have all your life before, Like I have fire insurance, and even if my house never burns down, I sleep better knowing I have fire insurance. Even if I never get injured at work, it makes me feel better to know that if I am injured at work, it's not going to destroy my family's economic security, because there's LNI, there's workers' comp in place, or unemployment insurance. Even if you don't need it, when you're planning for your retirement, if you didn't have walk cares, you'd have to save all that money additionally yourself. And you wouldn't know how much to save. That's the hard part. Would you save 30,000? Would you save 300,000, or save nothing at all? It's hard to calculate. So one of the virtues of insurance is that you pay in a modest amount, and then you have a degree of security there that helps you meet your needs.
All right, great. And we've got one more question on the part-time work piece. Ben, maybe you can remind folks how much you need to work or pay in order to get the benefit if you're working part-time.
Sure. Well, there's two ways this can work. One is if you're an employee, like you get a W-2, then you have to work 500 hours in a year to earn a qualifying year. So to earn 10% of that benefit, right, for a near retiree. If you are self-employed, that would be there's a different way to do it. It's basically those 500 hours times. My understanding is that the way it's going to be implemented is that 500 hours times the minimum wage would yield a dollar amount. And if your net earnings as a self-employed person were at that level or above, then you will earn a qualifying year as well. So it's essentially the equivalent in dollars of our requirement for employees.
All right, great. We've also got, seems like a bit of confusion from some folks about opting in. Maybe we can just do a reminder on who isn't automatically paying in.
I mean, anybody who's a W-2 worker is automatic unless you have received an exemption in writing from the Employment Security Department. And the only people who have received exemptions thus far were people who bought private insurance prior to November of last year. And then there are some new exemption categories that were enacted this year. If you're an out-of-state worker who commutes to work in Washington, or if you're on a temporary visa, or you're a military spouse, or you're a veteran who's 70% or greater service-connected disabled, you can apply for an exemption starting this coming January. Receive that exemption, then you would also be not in the program. But for everyone else, everyone's in there automatically. It's like Medicare.
All right, great. We are just about out of time. Are there any other final comments from our panelists?
This is Cathy MacCaul again with AARP. I think Walk Cares is such existing home and community-based services here in Washington State. And we are ranked nationally, the state, for the care that we provide in Washington State to people that as they age. Can we do better? Yes. Is this perfect? No. Is it an incredible, great step forward? Yes. Benefit to people as they retire. And AARP was a very strong advocate for making sure that near retirees have access to some of this benefit on a rated basis. And we're really, really thankful for the legislature for making that decision and passing that to the legislation. But we continue. These are some great questions. I've been taking notes frantically because these are some really great questions that I hope that we can answer even in some of the AARP webinars in the future. Laura?
Looks like we maybe got you on mute still.
My technical glitches. Thank you all. My last comment is echo just what Cathy was about to say. Washington State is an excellent place to just live and age and retire in. We're top for longevity in the nation, and of course top for services for aging and disabled services. And that goes to a lot to policy decisions that our state makes and how we invest. So we're all very fortunate, and especially toward near retirees, what we know is some of the best years of our lives are in our late 60s. So there's a lot to look forward to in retirement. So enjoy it. Thank you all.
Thank you. All right. Thank you all for coming today. And thank you so much to our panelists for being here to share their knowledge and perspectives. You will be able to find a recording of today's webinar on the WACARES website at the URL on your screen, wacaresfund.wa.gov/learn-more. We will have these slides and resources from our panelists' organizations linked there as well. If you have questions about the program, you can contact us at wacaresfund@dshs.wa.gov or 1-844-CARE4WA. And we will be doing another webinar next month. We'll be having a conversation on cultivating a new generation of caregivers. If you'd like more info on that, make sure to sign up for our email list on the WACARES website. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.